Hello and welcome to Investment Insight. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's break down what's happening in the markets today in a clear and simple way. Let's start with a mental image. When someone brings up the word cloud, what immediately pops into your head?
I mean, for most people, it's probably exactly what the big tech marketing departments want you to see,
Yeah.
like something floating up in the sky, totally weightless, completely invisible, or maybe a pristine, hyper-modern white data center sitting safely out in the middle of a desert somewhere.
Right, exactly. And as everyday beginner investors, we just kind of buy into that image, don't we? We buy
Yeah.
shares in cloud computing stocks, we invest in the big AI companies, we pick up some tech giant ETFs, and we operate on this really vague assumption that our data is just magically zipping through the air.
Yeah, it's a very comfortable assumption.
But as we dig into recent analysis of global infrastructure, we uncover a reality that is completely different. I mean, that cloud you're investing your hard-earned money into, it doesn't live in the sky at all. The vast majority of it sits at the absolute bottom of the ocean. It's cold, it's pitch dark, and as the data shows us today, it is incredibly vulnerable.
It really is. It's honestly one of the most massive misconceptions in the modern economy today.
Mhm.
And, realizing the truth of that misconception is completely reshaping how we view global economic security.
Because it's not just marine biology down there anymore.
No, not at all. The ocean floor is no longer just for, like, biologists looking for new jellyfish or people hunting for shipwrecks. Based on current defense and market data, the seabed has rapidly become the absolute center of gravity for global defense. It's the lifeline for AI development, and frankly, it's shaping up to be the next major investment boom for the next decade.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how these surprisingly fragile undersea cables have become the literal arteries of modern civilization. And more importantly for you, the investor tuning in, we are going to look at why major global alliances, specifically AUKUS, which is that defense partnership between the US, the UK, and Australia, why they're aggressively pivoting away from traditional naval warfare and pouring billions into underwater drones to protect those arteries.
Because, simply put, the truth of the global market right now is this. You cannot have an artificial intelligence revolution without an absolute ocean of data. And you absolutely cannot move that ocean of data without these physical cables lying in the mud at the bottom of the sea.
I was actually trying to wrap my head around the scale of this earlier, and it's almost like looking at the global internet as a human nervous system.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Like, if you are a bad actor and your goal is to paralyze a body, you don't necessarily need to waste your energy attacking the large muscular limbs. You don't go after the big, obvious, heavily armored targets. You just find a critical nerve and you pinch it.
Right, just sever the connection.
Exactly. You sever that thin little connection and the entire limb just goes dead.
So if almost all of our global data is literally sitting underwater on a cable that's, no thicker than a garden hose, are we essentially leaving our most vital organs completely exposed for anyone to just reach down and pinch?
I mean, the data suggests that is a very sobering but highly accurate way to frame it. To put some hard numbers to the scale of that exposure, the International Telecommunication Union, which is the UN agency that deals with global communications, they track that 99% of all intercontinental internet traffic runs through these subsea fiber optic cables.
Wait, 99%.
99%. Just let that sink in for a second.
That is staggering. I mean, we always hear telecom companies talking about satellites, so you'd think the split would be, I don't know, maybe 70-30, but 99% is basically everything.
It is everything. And it's crucial to look at what the word traffic actually means in this context, right? We have a tendency to think of internet traffic as just, people streaming movies or scrolling through social media.
But consumer traffic. Exactly. But that is just the consumer layer. The real traffic we are talking about involves trillions of dollars in daily financial market settlements between global banks. We are talking about the massive terabyte-heavy datasets required to train the next generation of artificial intelligence models.
Right, the stuff driving the market right now.
Exactly. We are talking about encrypted military communications, real-time global supply chain logistics, the enterprise cloud services that keep multinational corporations running. If those underwater cables get pinched, like in your analogy, the modern economy essentially goes into cardiac arrest.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. They're at the bottom of the ocean, right? Under thousands of feet of crushing water pressure. It's not like a rogue hacker can just swim down there in a scuba suit with a pair of garden shears. So practically speaking, how vulnerable are we actually talking about here?
Well, the vulnerability matrix has evolved incredibly fast over just the last few years. Historically, I mean, the main dangers to these cables were acts of nature, underwater earthquakes, massive landslides, or just genuine clumsy accidents.
Like a fishing boat.
Yeah, for decades, the biggest threat was just a commercial fishing boat dropping a heavy trawling net in the wrong place and accidentally snagging a line. But according to recent geopolitical reports, the nature of the danger has really shifted from accidental to intentional.
Right, I saw those numbers in the analysis, and they are pretty hard to ignore. Over the last 18 months alone, there have been 5 separate cable-cutting incidents in the Taiwan Strait, and another 3 major incidents in the Baltic Sea.
Yeah, the frequency is definitely alarming.
At a certain point, a string of, accidents in highly contested geopolitical waters stops looking like a coincidence and starts looking like a very deliberate pattern.
Oh, absolutely. What we are witnessing is the real-world deployment of what military strategists refer to as gray zone warfare.
Gray zone warfare. I've heard that term thrown around a lot on the news networks lately, but break down how that actually functions in the context of the ocean floor.
So, gray zone tactics are essentially aggressive, disruptive actions taken by a nation-state that intentionally fall just below the legal threshold of an actual act of war.
Okay, so pushing the limit without crossing it.
Exactly. The goal is to severely damage your opponent's economy or their communications, but do it in a way that allows you to maintain plausible deniability. You want the victim to know you did it, but you want to leave them without enough hard proof to justify, say, launching missiles in retaliation.
Got it.
And recent analysis points out that countries like Russia and China are allegedly utilizing what maritime experts call shadow fleets to do this.
Shadow fleets. Okay, how does a massive ship stay in the shadows? I mean, it's not invisible.
No, not literally invisible,
Right.
but administratively invisible. These are often commercial vessels, rusty fishing boats, or supposedly innocent scientific research ships that operate with incredibly opaque ownership structures.
Oh, so shell companies and that sort of thing?
Right. They use shell companies to hide who actually owns them. And they sail under flags of convenience, meaning they are registered in countries with very loose maritime laws. So what they do is sail over known critical undersea cable routes, and then they just turn off their automatic identification system, or AIS.
Okay, and just to clarify for everyone, the AIS is basically the global GPS beacon system that all commercial ships use to broadcast who they are and where they are going, right? So they don't crash into each other.
Yes, exactly. And turning off your AIS in a busy shipping lane is a massive red flag.
Wow.
So they go dark, they drop a multi-ton iron anchor, and they just drag it for miles across the seabed, completely shredding the fiber optic infrastructure below.
Wow.
And then when a patrol boat finally shows up to investigate, the ship just turns its beacon back on, pulls up the anchor, and the captain claims they just had a mechanical failure or a navigational error.
So it's almost like having a really hostile neighbor who keeps accidentally driving over your property line and chopping up your high-speed internet cable with their lawnmower.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
And every time you confront them, they just say, oops, my bad. I lost control of the mower. Didn't even see the cable there. But here is where I get stuck. At what point do you stop treating it as a clumsy accident and just build a massive fence to keep them out? And, mechanically speaking, how do you even build a fence at the bottom of the ocean? We are talking about international waters here, millions of square miles of open sea. You can't just put up a chain link fence.
No, you can't. And you've hit on the trillion-dollar logistical nightmare right there. How do you police the unpoliceable?
Right.
And that brings us directly to how global powers are attempting to construct that exact underwater fence. This was the major overarching focal point at the recent Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, which took place at the end of May 2026.
And just to set the context for you listening, the Shangri-La Dialogue is essentially the premier defense and security summit for the entire Indo-Pacific region. It's where all the major defense ministers gather to kind of lay out their strategies.
Yeah, and the most significant headline to emerge from that summit revolved around the AUKUS alliance. Originally, AUKUS, which, just to recap, is the trilateral security partnership between Australia, the UK, and the US. It was famous for its Pillar 1 initiative.
Right, the submarines.
Exactly. That initial deal was all about the US and UK helping Australia acquire highly advanced nuclear-powered submarines. It was a historic agreement, but it was still very focused on traditional manned naval power. Big ships, big crews, traditional deterrence.
But reading through the transcripts of the dialogue, it's pretty clear the strategy is completely shifting gears now.
Oh, it is expanding into entirely new technological territory. At the dialogue, AUKUS formally announced its Pillar 2 signature project. The focus is no longer just on manned submarines. The heavy investment is moving toward uncrewed undersea vehicles, or UUVs.
So underwater drones.
Yes, highly autonomous underwater drones. And this isn't just some white paper concept for the distant future either. The alliance stated that physical deliveries of these systems are actually slated to start in 2027.
And the rationale behind this pivot is really stark. I was reading a quote from the summit by the Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles, and he used a phrase that really stuck with me. He warned the assembly that the seabed is being weaponized.
It's a powerful statement.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we are moving far beyond a simple submarine acquisition deal. This is a fully integrated, advanced military tech alliance entirely focused on dominating the ocean floor.
And the technological leap here is staggering when you look at how they actually plan to deploy these drones. They are building a defense concept known as seabed to space situational awareness.
Seabed to space, I mean, that sounds fantastic in a press release, kind of like a sci-fi movie, but how does that actually work mechanically? Because the ocean is incredibly loud. You have whales, you have other submarines, natural seismic activity. How does the system actually filter all that out to find one single anchor?
Well, it works by creating a multi-layered, three-dimensional security web that relies heavily on artificial intelligence. Under the current outdated system, if a cable is cut in the middle of the Atlantic, we usually only know about it because a data center in London suddenly loses its connection to New York. The data just stops flowing.
So it's totally reactive.
Completely reactive.
Yeah.
By the time a specialized repair ship gets coordinates and sails out there, the Shadow Fleet vessel that dragged the anchor is already hundreds of miles away.
They've already done the damage and fled the scene.
Yes. So the seabed to space concept flips that entire paradigm from reacting after the fact to predicting and intercepting before the cut happens. Mechanically, it starts with placing advanced acoustic sonar sensors directly on the ocean floor, clustered around the most critical cable routes.
Okay, but again, the noise issue. How does the sensor know it's a threat and not a humpback whale passing by?
That is where the AI data analysis platforms come in. A multi-ton steel anchor dragging across rock and sand produces a very specific acoustic frequency, a distinct auditory signature of scraping metal. The AI is trained to filter out biological noises and single out that exact mechanical scraping sound.
That's incredible.
Right. And the moment the seabed sensor detects that acoustic signature, it beams a data packet up to a surface buoy floating above it.
Okay, so from the seabed to the surface, then what?
Then the buoy instantly relays that signal up to a low Earth orbit satellite. The satellite bounces the signal down to a naval command center. In that command center, another AI system immediately cross-references the location of the sound with the global AF's transponder database we talked about earlier.
Oh, wow. So tying it all together.
Exactly. If the AI sees a ship directly above the scraping sound, but that ship has mysteriously turned off its AI's beacon, well, it instantly flags the vessel as a hostile threat. And at that exact moment, an autonomous underwater drone, one of these new UUVs, can be deployed from a nearby base or a mothership to intercept, monitor, or physically deter that vessel before it ever reaches the main cable cluster.
Okay, wait, I need to push back on this a bit because the scale of this sounds absolutely massive. Are we basically just building incredibly expensive weaponized Roombas for the entire ocean floor? Because the ocean is unimaginably vast. Trying to cover all of it with acoustic sensors and drones just sounds financially ruinous.
It's a huge undertaking, yeah.
Right. So as a beginner investor trying to make sense of this, I really need to know, is this just a niche, hyper-expensive defense contract that will eventually fizzle out? Or is this a fundamental shift in how global capital views the ocean itself?
It is undeniably a fundamental repricing of ocean real estate. You really have to stop looking at the ocean as empty space. The seabed is now viewed by superpowers as a strategic domain, carrying the exact same weight and importance as sovereign airspace or outer space.
Wow.
And because the data flowing through those cables is the lifeblood of the modern economy, the infrastructure required to monitor it represents a massive multi-decade capital expenditure cycle. It is not a niche contract, it is a whole new sector.
But building a high-tech AI-driven net across millions of square miles of ocean introduces a massive logistical nightmare, which is the price tag. Historically, the U.S. would just kind of absorb this cost, act as the world's police, and protect the global commons. But from what we saw at the Shangri-La dialogue, that era of the blank check is officially over.
It is. That is a major geopolitical shift that everyday investors really need to internalize right now. We saw this explicitly stated at the summit by the U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. He stood up in front of the region's defense leaders and stated clearly that the United States wants partners, not protectorates.
Partners, not protectorates. And we really have to view that statement through the lens of President Trump's administration, which has placed a heavy, consistent emphasis on the philosophy that American allies must pay their fair share of defense costs.
Yes, exactly.
The core stance is that the American taxpayer, and by extension the American domestic economy, should not be bearing the sole financial burden of policing international waters, especially when the economic benefits of those waters, like global trade and trillion-dollar data flows, are shared by all these other nations.
Yeah, the benefits are global, so the funding needs to be global.
So it's almost like going out to a huge group dinner, right? For decades, the U.S. has essentially been the wealthy friend, quietly picking up the check for the entire table so everyone else could just enjoy the meal. But now Washington is finally sliding the bill to the middle of the table, tapping the glass and saying, hey, we're splitting this tonight.
That's a perfect analogy.
But here's my concern with that. If the U.S. suddenly steps back and tells countries like Australia, Japan, and the U.K. to fund and build their own maritime defense drones, doesn't that risk creating a highly fragmented, disorganized mess? Like, if Australia builds one drone system and Japan builds another completely different one, how do we know their software will even talk to each other underwater? Doesn't this just make the defense grid weaker overall?
That is a very astute concern, and it's exactly why AUKUS Pillar 2 is structured the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. isn't just walking away from the table, right? They're just changing their role at the table.
Okay, how so?
To avoid that fragmentation you mentioned, the U.S. is providing the core technological architecture. They're providing the foundational software, the AI interoperability standards, and the operational concepts. They ensure all the systems speak the exact same language. But what they are demanding is that the allied partners, the UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, step up to provide the industrial manufacturing base and, crucially, the funding to actually build the hardware.
Oh, I see. So the overarching blueprint is American, but the factories building the drones and the budgets paying for them are increasingly foreign.
Precisely.
What does this mean for a beginner investor sitting at home looking at their brokerage app? Should they stop just blindly buying the classic American defense giants like Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics and start looking overseas?
Well, the investment landscape is definitely broadening because the fundamental funding structure of global defense is changing. The demand for advanced military tech is no longer bottlenecked purely by what the U.S. Congress is willing to approve in their annual budget.
Right.
You now have allied nations massively increasing their own maritime defense spending to meet these new American expectations and, honestly, to protect their own digital economies.
So if telecom companies realize their undersea cables are essentially sitting ducks, how do they navigate this? It feels like we are transitioning from a story about military defense into a much broader story about the wider tech market. How should an everyday investor map out this new economic reality?
It's a great question. Based on market analysis, we can clearly see the emergence of a new, interconnected investment cluster. It basically has 4 pillars.
Okay, let's break those down.
It starts with maritime defense. For a long time, defense investing was heavily skewed toward aerospace. Fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, satellite defense. Now, the new growth engines are in the water.
So subsea drones, advanced sonar arrays.
Exactly. Autonomous mine-clearing technology, highly specialized underwater communications. Companies building the acoustic sensors and the AI navigation systems for the ocean floor are looking at a massive, long-term demand curve.
But the ripple effects go far beyond pure defense companies. Which brings us to the telecom and cloud infrastructure sectors, right? But viewed through a totally different lens than we are used to.
Usually when investors think of telecom stocks, they think of safe, slow-moving, somewhat boring dividend companies. You buy them, you hold them, you collect your reliable quarterly payout. But that model is fracturing.
Because the risk profile has changed.
Right. Because the risk of their physical cables being severed by a shadow fleet has skyrocketed. Their baseline operational costs are fundamentally changing. They're no longer just utility providers. They are operating what analysts are now calling digital geopolitical infrastructure.
Meaning they have to spend their own capital to protect themselves. They have to hire private maritime security contractors, invest in continuous physical monitoring, and most importantly, they have to build incredibly expensive, redundant backup lines just in case a primary cable goes down.
Yes, it represents a significant short-term capital expenditure increase for these companies.
Mm.
But long-term, the telecom and cloud providers that successfully build resilient, uncuttable networks become incredibly valuable.
They become indispensable.
Exactly. They aren't just selling internet bandwidth to enterprise clients anymore. They are selling guaranteed geopolitical security to massive AI firms and global financial institutions who simply cannot afford to go offline for even a minute.
So if a telecom company's main underwater cable gets sliced by an anchor, how do they keep their massive clients online while a repair ship slowly makes its way out there? I mean, they are forced to buy expensive insurance policies in the sky, which explains why we were seeing such a massive surge in the third part of this investment cluster, which is low Earth orbit, or LEO, satellites.
Right. When an underwater cable goes dark, the data needs an immediate alternative route. We've actually seen this playing out in real-time, high-stakes environments like Taiwan.
Oh, yeah, the analysis mentioned that.
Yeah, the data notes that after Taiwan experienced intentional cable damage to its outer islands,
Yeah.
like Dongye and Matsu,
Huh.
the local population and military outposts were completely cut off. The government didn't just wait around for a repair ship. They actively began aggressive testing of low Earth orbit satellite communications to ensure they had a functional backup system ready to go.
But I want to pump the brakes on the satellite hype for just a second here.
Okay.
Whenever a major internet outage happens or a cable gets cut, the immediate reaction on financial news is always, just use satellites, space is the future. But based on the actual data transfer rates, isn't trying to replace subsea fiber optic cables with satellites kind of like trying to drain an Olympic swimming pool with a plastic drinking straw? I mean, the raw bandwidth capacity simply isn't there, right? Satellites are just the backup parachute. They aren't the main engine.
You are absolutely right to push back on that, and it is a crucial distinction for investors to understand before they dump their life savings into space stocks. Physical cables are still entirely unmatched when it comes to raw data capacity, speed, and cost efficiency.
Right.
A single, modern fiber optic cable lying on the ocean floor can carry more data in 1 second than an entire constellation of commercial satellites. Satellites are an expensive insurance policy. They guarantee that critical military, government, and emergency communications survive if a physical cable is cut, but they simply cannot carry the immense, heavy weight of global financial markets or the terabytes needed for AI data training.
So the takeaway is invest in OLEO satellites for their strategic, critical backup value, but do not operate under the assumption that they are making ocean cables obsolete anytime soon.
Correct. Which leads to the fourth and final piece of this puzzle, cybersecurity. But we are talking about a radical evolution of the concept, the merging of physical security and digital security into a single platform.
Explain how those two worlds are colliding. Historically, cybersecurity just meant putting a strong digital firewall around a server to stop a hacker from stealing credit card numbers. It was purely software.
Today, the threat vector is three-dimensional. A company has to physically protect the concrete data center, digitally protect the LEO satellite link from hacking, and physically protect the underwater cable from a dragging anchor, all at the exact same time.
Man, that is complex.
Extremely. The threat could be a sophisticated malware code originating from a laptop, or it could be a rusty fishing boat dragging iron across the seafloor. Companies that can offer integrated threat intelligence using AI to monitor network traffic for digital intrusions while simultaneously monitoring AI ship data and acoustic sonar for physical maritime threats, they are creating an entirely new, highly lucrative subsector of defense tech.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today? If we synthesize all these complex geopolitical moves, the AI tech, and the shifting defense budgets, the core lesson is this. The bottom of the ocean is the hidden bottleneck of the entire AI and digital era. As investors, we get so easily caught up in the flashy stuff, the newest generative AI chips, the massive shiny data centers, the latest software IPOs.
It's easy to get distracted by that.
It is. But whether you are investing in artificial intelligence, cloud computing, global logistics, or defense, you have to look beneath the surface. You have to consider who is actually keeping the data flowing underwater, because if that nervous system gets pinched, the brains simply cannot function.
And that reality leaves us with a fascinating, somewhat provocative question to chew on as we evaluate the future of the global market.
What's that?
Well, if a single accidental anchor drag from a rogue shadow fleet ship can cripple an entire region's digital economy, And if traditional governments are struggling with the immense cost of policing the vastness of the ocean floor, how long will it be until massive private tech companies decide they simply can't rely on governments anymore?
Oh, wow.
How long until the big cloud and AI providers realize they have to protect their own trillion-dollar AI investments and start building their own private, corporate underwater navies and drone fleets?
A private corporate navy patrolling the ocean floor on behalf of a tech giant. I mean, that sounds like a dystopian novel, but given the financial stakes we've discussed today, it is a wildly realistic thought to end on. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the invisible backbone of the global economy. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.